Klaus, the President of the Czech Republic, to the United Kingdom and this special meeting of the Bruges Group. Since Margaret Thatcher left the political stage, President Klaus has become the leading critic of the European Union amongst Europe's statesmen. His opposition has been based upon his advocacy of liberal democracy and free markets. He was, of course, the last head of state to sign the Lisbon Treaty. What a shame others did not honour their cast iron guarantee to hold a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. Vaclav Klaus has also played a pivotal role in bringing democracy and free markets to his native land. A leading figure in the Velvet Revolution, he has then served as his country's Prime Minister, his country's Finance Minister, and now his country's President. Today, the storm clouds of economic depression and political instability hang heavily over much of Europe. The mistaken decision to form a currency union is reaping a whirlwind. The difficulties which now confront us were, of course, seen by Vaclav Klaus when he said in September 2003, "This is crossing the Rubicon. After this, there will be no more sovereign states in Europe with fully fledged governments and parliaments, which represent the legitimate interests of the citizens. But only one state will remain. Basic things will be decided by remote federal government." Ladies and gentlemen, today it is my pleasure to introduce Professor and President Vaclav Klaus.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for your invitation and for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about Europe here in London in this very special period of time, and to see some good old friends here. I am aware of your group's continuing interest in this topic, and suppose I will not be blowing against the wind in front of this audience. Europe, or perhaps better to say the European Union, has been also my interest and topic for many years. In my views, I was also influenced by Margaret Thatcher and by her fight for freedom and against ever closer, which means undemocratic Europe. Many people in Europe, not the Bruges Group people, have not paid sufficient attention to the developments on our continent until very recently, or haven't dared look at them critically or analytically. Some of them started to pay closer attention to the European problems 2 years ago, in the moment of the explicit, visible, and evidently undeniable Eurozone debt crisis. But most of them still do not want to know that this crisis is only the tip of a much bigger iceberg. They, together with their politicians and most of economists, considered even the 2008-2009 crisis a global phenomenon, which Europe innocently imported from outside. even though it was evident that this was a European and North American crisis, not a global one. The long-lasting problems in Europe have been widely underestimated, and that's the reason why we should put it into the proper historical perspective. European integration was originally based on a rational idea to liberalize Europe, to open it up, to eliminate various kinds of barriers which existed at the borders of European countries, to expand trade by establishing a free trade zone and a customs union, and by building a common market and a large interconnected economic space. It is probably necessary to say explicitly that the original idea was not to liberalize the economic and social system in individual European countries. This liberalization activity more or less characterized the first decades of the European integration process. This brought some positive results, especially as compared to the 1930s. Nevertheless, I suppose most of you would agree that the current era is different. European integration moved to a different stage. The overall liberalization and removal of inter-country barriers were replaced by a massive shift of competencies from individual member states to the European Union's commanding heights in Brussels, by the radical switch from intergovernmentalism to supranationalism, by the intentional and carefully organized weakening of the meaning and cohesion of the original building blocks of European integration of individual European countries, by an overall wide-ranging shift towards European governance, and by large-scale centralization, anti-market regulation, standardization, and harmonization of the whole continent. In the past, a spontaneously created, highly heterogeneous European continent flourished due to its diversity, to its non-uniformity, and to the existing and healthy systemic competition among countries. This changed when Europe became unified and artificially made uniform by a centrally organized governance and legislation. It led to the very disturbing economic outcomes we see around, and to what is called a democratic deficit, or a lack of democratic accountability. I call it post-democracy. The present-day institutional uniformity turned into a straitjacket which keeps blocking all kinds of positive human activities. The most important moment in this process was the establishment of the European Monetary Union and the introduction of one currency in a group of originally 12, now 17 countries that evidently do not form what the economists call an optimal currency area. The undergoing Eurozone debt crisis is an inevitable consequence of one currency, one exchange rate, and one interest rate for countries with very diverse economic parameters. The political decision, and it was a strictly and exclusively political decision in favor of this arrangement, was taken without almost any attention being paid to the existing economic fundamentals. The economists know that non-optimal, which means wrongly constructed monetary unions, are costly and do not last long. Such arrangements may be hypothetically saved by a high degree of solidarity among their members and by huge fiscal transfers. But there is no, and there can't be any truly authentic feeling of solidarity in Europe, which existed, for example, in Germany after its unification at the beginning of the 1990s. And there is no, from heavens falling, large volume of funds in the hands of the supranational political authorities to compensate the countries which are, because of their economic parameters, the victims of such an arrangement. Due to it, there is, in my view, no imminent solution to the Eurozone sovereign debt trap. There are only very unpleasant consequences: short-term economic and budgetary problems and long-term stagnation. Some people dream about the forthcoming acceleration of economic growth. It is difficult, if not impossible, to find any reason for such a magic acceleration of growth to occur in Europe. On the contrary, most EU countries must make fiscal cuts, not fiscal expansions, and not only in the short term, but at least in the medium term as well. And in the long run, Keynes famously said, we are all dead. The current European unification construct or model is, however, only half of the whole problem. In addition to the difficulties resulting from the integration itself, there is a huge problem with the European economic and social system, with the European soziale Marktwirtschaft. It is much better to say it in German than in English. Because the European soziale Marktwirtschaft prefers social policy based on income redistribution to productive activities. It prefers leisure, free time, and long holidays to hard work. It prefers consumption to investments, debt to savings, and security to risk-taking. It prefers social democratism to capitalism. This economic and social model is part of a broader civilizational and cultural framework which is already deeply rooted in Europe or in most of its countries. It can't be abandoned easily. It can't be corrected by painless or cosmetic palliative measures. It can't be changed as a result of one or another EU summit. To make Europe functional and productive again requires a deep systemic change, something structurally similar to the task we had to accomplish more than 2 decades ago in the Czech Republic when we tried to get rid of communism and its legacy. When I mentioned for the first time the term Czech Republic, I hope that at least some of you know that the Czech Republic still uses its own currency. We were sufficiently and in advance aware of the difficulties connected with the wrongly constructed model of a monetary union. We wanted to continue our much-needed overall adjustment processes with sufficient adjustment capabilities, which requires our own flexible exchange rate, our own interest rates, and our own monetary policies. We do not find, and we didn't find, any advantage in using neither the German nor Greek exchange and interest rates. For the time being, we don't have any plans to enter the Eurozone. Just as a remark, last week's opinion poll in the Czech Republic indicated that only 19% of Czechs want to join the Eurozone sometimes in the future. 76% say no, 76%, and 5% say that they don't know. So with all the believing or not believing in the opinion polls, I think that the basic figures are quite clear and significant. As I said, the escaping from the current European crisis needs a fundamental systemic change, which means at least two things: the transformation of the European social and economic system, and the restructuring of the European institutional or political arrangement, in another terminology, the form of the European integration. I am convinced that both things are of the same importance. Let me tentatively suggest the main components of such a change. I have 8 points which I will try to suggest. First, we have to get rid of the unproductive and paternalistic soziale Marktwirtschaft, augmented, which means further undermined by the growing role of the green ideology. That's my suggestion number one. I must make a special remark. When I made similar ideas months ago in Germany, in Dresden, 1,200 people coming from the CDU, Christian Democratic Union in Germany, together with the Prime Minister of Saxony and all the leading politicians. When I said that sentence, there was a huge applause. And I said, I am absolutely shocked. I didn't expect that you in Germany would applaud exactly that sentence, which is, for me, relatively interesting and maybe, hopefully, significant. So that's the first point, to get rid of the soziale Marktwirtschaft. Second, we should accept, our politicians should accept, that the economic adjustment processes take time and that the impatient politicians and governments usually make things worse. The politicians shouldn't try to mastermind the markets, to micromanage the economy, to produce growth by government stimuli and incentives. So let the market function. Point number 3. We should start making comprehensive reductions of government expenditures and forget flirting with solutions based on tax increases. Interesting, in Great Britain the applause is after tax increases, and that's interesting. These reductions, these budgetary reductions, must dominantly deal with mandatory expenditures, because discretionary spending cuts are, as a long-term solution, quantitatively more or less insignificant. Number 4. We should stop the creeping but constantly expanding green legislation. The Greens must be stopped from taking over much of our economy under the banner of such flawed ideas as the global warming doctrine. Number 5. We should get rid of the centralization, harmonization, standardization of the European continent, and after half a century of such measures, start decentralizing, deregulating, and desubsidizing our society and economy. Number 6. We should make it possible for countries which are the victims of the European Monetary Union to leave it and to return to their own monetary arrangements. That's for me absolutely crucial, but it's necessary to stress to make it possible for the countries, which means hypothetically to help them in this respect. Number 7, we should forget such plans or projects as a European fiscal union, not to speak about ostentatively anti-democratic ambitions to politically unify Europe. And my final point, we should return to democracy, which can exist only at the level of nation states, not at the level of the whole continent. It requires returning from supranationalism to intergovernmentalism. Those are my 8 points, and again, I mentioned my recent speech in Germany, and some time ago I didn't have 8, but just 6 points in Washington D.C. in one of the Republican think tanks in the U.S., and I spoke about Europe. And what was very interesting, that someone from the first row was the first to ask a question, well, it's not just for Europe, it's for the United States as well, such a program to do. So I hope a serious discussion of these issues I talked about will finally begin in Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. We now have an opportunity for questions. Yes, gentleman on the second in from the gangway. Yes, you, sir.
Good afternoon, President Klaus. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you very much for coming along. Agreed with everything that you said. Your 8-point plan is never going to happen while countries remain members of the European Union. I don't believe. I can't see the European Union voluntarily dismantling all of its thousands and thousands of regulation and decentralising and giving power back. Isn't your plan really dependent upon the European Union coming apart? And won't that only happen when countries like Britain actually have the guts to pull out, and perhaps Czechoslovakia as well, and then other countries will follow and what's left will collapse?
Well, First, I'm not sure that Europe is already prepared for such a fundamental change. I'm afraid that many Europeans still believe in the quasi-religious doctrine of Europeanism, which is a sort of religion, or at least an ideology. So I am not sure. In my country, 22 years ago, most of the Czechs were convinced that the old system is basically, fundamentally wrong. So everyone understood that it's not sufficient to make some partial reforms. The people accepted that there must be a fundamental systemic change. And it was easier for us, for us politicians, to tell them what we have to do. I'm afraid the situation in Europe is not yet at that stage. There is still a nirvana of vacations on Mallorca or in Greece even today, and I'm afraid that Europe is not ready to do that. I am not advocating to go into deeper problems, to convince more people to be aware of the problems. Nevertheless, I don't see what to do tomorrow or day after tomorrow. I'm afraid that for some time we will be still muddling through, but my consequences, as I said, short and medium term economic and social and financial and budgetary problems, plus a long-term stagnation. When, at what moment there will be more people, more politicians ready to raise their voice and to do something, I can't make a good forecast into the future. Nevertheless, what is quite clear, the solution will not be found at one or another EU summit. It's not a situation for some EU presidents or prime ministers to meet and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and at 3 o'clock in the morning to have a program what to do with Europe. That's not the situation. It must be a long-term political process, and it must start in individual EU countries. It will never start in Brussels. Because there is no policy. There is just lobbying there, but no policy. So we have to return European issue to the political issues at home, and to do it in small countries like the Czech Republic is not sufficient. It must be done in bigger countries like Great Britain.
Gentlemen, in the middle of that row of the walking stick. Yes.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you very much for your presentation, which I much enjoyed. My question for you is, I was interested, during your introduction, that you were the last head of state to sign the Lisbon Treaty. My question is, why did you sign it?
Well, I must say that I didn't have a mandate in the country to do it, not to do it. I had a mandate to postpone the signature for 2 years and to make disputes in the constitutional court and things like that. But I didn't have a real mandate to. I was waiting for Great Britain to help, but yes. The help, I must say, the help. The help didn't come, so that's the problem. You should tell your government at that time.
Yes, I think many of us feel that you were rather let down on the Lisbon Treaty by people that assume power here. The next question, gentleman with the orange tie.
Good afternoon, President Klaus. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've got 2 questions. Some of the alternatives to the EU are the Norway version, EFTA EEA, and the Swiss version, EFTA bilateral. Some people in the UK would like to go for the Big Bang approach, just completely leave the EU, or the step-by-step approach. I just wondered for the Czech Republic, do you believe an approach of switch to the Norway version, then another referendum for the Swiss version, and then another referendum, say later for complete sovereignty would be an approach? And what do you think about the idea for MEPs in the European Parliament to set up an EFTA grouping in there for a positive alternative to the EU as a stepping stone?
Well, I must say I started to be an adult person. At that moment in Europe there were two organizations. One was the EEC and the other was EFTA. And of course, even in the dark communist days, for people like me, EFTA looked as a much more interesting organization to join. But after the fall of communism, in the first days, I must say that the remaining countries of EFTA group visited me several times, and they asked me, would you join EFTA? But EFTA at that moment was already a meaningless, irrelevant organization, and even to mention EFTA now is for me, in my understanding, a mistake and a demonstration of having dreams and not living in a real world. Again, when I answered the question about the Lisbon Treaty and I mentioned the help or non-help coming from Great Britain, you must admit again, who killed EFTA was Great Britain. It must be made very explicit. It is quite evident. The moment you decided to leave EFTA and to join the European community, you yourself, you killed EFTA. And to speak about EFTA after your joining the European community is, in my understanding, absolutely irrelevant, not interesting.
Gentleman on the front row in white shirt.
Mr. President, David Campbell-Bannerman, MEP. It is great to see you back in London, and your ODS colleagues do a lot with our group, the ECR group, in the European Parliament. Can I congratulate you on the speech you gave the European Parliament? You managed to empty it, and hundreds left, because you were speaking the truth. You were talking about democracy, and you were saying that there is no European demos, and the EU is profoundly undemocratic. And I was very proud of you that day. A lot of people looked at me strangely, but a lot of people walked out, but you showed real courage on that day, and I really congratulate you on that. And it is about democracy. This is all about democracy. And I would say, just how great is the threat to democracy from the European Union, and how close is it to the Soviet Union with the perspective, the unique perspective that you have had? Thank you.
Well, I agree fully with your saying that it's all about democracy. Definitely. That's the real issue. And I must say that when I look at the world now, or better to say at Europe, I must say that the world now is much more socialist, if not almost communist, than I expected in November 1989 in the fall of communism. So that's a reason to speculate why it is so. But I'm afraid that this is the main problem. So I agree fully with you that it's all about democracy. I don't like making easy and cheap comparisons with the Soviet Union or communism. That's not important or relevant. What I see here in Europe these days is less and less democracy. The decision-making is done in a remote space. without our slightest chance to influence it. So that's my problem. How similar or explicitly or implicitly with the Soviet Union it is, it's not my point and my interest to discuss. What bothers me is what is nicely called democratic deficit. It's not a democratic deficit, it's the end of democracy in Europe. So that's something I feel very strongly about. When we made the change in 1989, together with other Central and Eastern European countries, we wanted freedom and democracy. We wanted also economic prosperity after the non-functioning communist, centrally planned, state-owned economic system. Now it seems to me that almost there are better results with the second aim than with the first one.
Thank you. Next question, gentleman on the gangway there. Yes. Yes, in the red tie.
Mr. President, many of us in this country were surprised that the two nations who did not agree at the meeting to the recent financial pact were Britain and the Czech Republic, not Britain and Denmark, the two countries who are not required to join the Union, the Euro at any time. I wondered if you could tell us how that puts the Czech Republic in terms of its commitment, presumably legal, at least European legal, to join the Euro at some time. The second thing I welcome your opinion on is, because of what's happening, the Euro group are going to speak as one voice, and yet nothing has been suggested anywhere, and I've discussed this with my own MP, to change qualified majority voting. Because effectively, right now, we've got 17 countries that are one country, and we've got 10 countries that are 10 countries. Now that's going to become 25 and 2. And if you're required to join the Euro, it's going to become 26 and 1. So how are we going to change the qualified voting system to give those of us who are left behind any sort of say that's going to have any meaning at all?
Well, for me, starting with the third point, for me the qualified majority voting and basically majority voting is a tragic mistake. So I am absolutely against it. So to make some refinements of that arrangement is for me not interesting. So I'm very much against majority voting as such, and the switch to the majority voting in Europe in the last 2 decades, started with Maastricht to Lisbon Treaty, is for me the biggest problem in Europe. As regards our position to the financial pact and the timing of it, well, I would say that when the countries of Central and Eastern Europe entered the European Union, by the way, it was 2 days ago, it was just 8 years. On the 1st of May 2004, it was just 8 years, and it was quite interesting to see the Czech articles in the newspapers yesterday. There were no newspapers on the 1st of May. And so yesterday's newspapers spent a lot of time discussing the costs and benefits of our entry into the European Union. And I must say that, to my great surprise, at least the crucial dailies put on the first side page, put more or less a balanced view of the pros and cons, at least nominally, or at least when you looked at it, that 10 points on one side and 10 points on the other. But at that time, we had no chance. We had no chance to not to accept a long-term without giving time, long-term commitment to participate in the European Monetary Union. I must say that at that time we were quite happy that there is no time limit, because when there is no time limit, we can go there in the year 2015, 25, 2337 eventually. So we didn't. I must say we didn't feel it as a commitment in with any given time framework, time dimension. What is really ridiculous, I must say that 20 years ago, maybe 15, I was asked, it was before our entry into the EU, I was asked on such meetings like this one, when do you expect to join the euro system? It was before the real start of the euro, and I answered, we don't need it, we are not in a hurry, and so on and so on. And when I had a feeling that the audience is more or less on my side, I must say that as a joke, I said, well, we will probably find some important anniversary. And I remember 15 years ago, I was always saying, well, what about joining the euro system in the moment of 100th anniversary of the October Revolution in Russia in the year 2017? And the audience laughed. And I had a feeling that I'm making a joke. Now it seems to me that I was too optimistic or too... I don't think we will join the euro system in the year 2017. So we will have to find another good anniversary.
Yes, I'll take a question from Bill Cash.
Mr. President, first of all, may I congratulate you not only on your speech today, but also on the complete consistency of your arguments. When I first met you, I think it was in 1989 or 1990, in your great country, I heard what you were saying then, and you've been entirely consistent ever since, and right. What I would like to ask you is a broader political question relating to the outcome of the French elections this weekend. Do you see that, as many of us do, that one of the political problems which has emerged and got greater has been the increasing power of Germany in its relationship to the rest of Europe? And do you think that the consequences of the outcome of the French elections may be to make that more acute, or do you think that it's something which may produce a change in direction in those international affairs?
Well, first, thank you for mentioning the consistency of my views, Bill, but maybe it's just the rigidity of mind of an old man, you know. I'm not able to be flexible enough, so therefore I repeat my old views permanently, so it may be a better explanation of that. Well, as a president of an EU country, I don't want to make strong comments about the French presidential elections. Nevertheless, for me, I would like to live in Europe of now 27 equal countries, not some more equal in the Orwellian meaning than the others, and whether it's one country or two, it's almost irrelevant for me.
Thank you.
But it is connected with all the other issues we discussed here. It's connected with the majority voting and so on. It's part of the same story.
If I may, two questions. The first directly relating to the economic problems of the euro. Do you believe that the most efficient way of resolving this problem might be that Germany leaves the euro? And my second question is, do you believe that the green agenda that has been implemented by the European countries has contributed in any significant way to the economic problems that we have today?
What agenda? The European?
The green.
The green.
The green implementation of all the significant.
Well, I am absolutely sure that the green ideology dramatically complicates the economic developments in Europe. They make the European economy non-competitive, over-regulated, rigid, and so on and so on. So I am convinced that the green policy measures are very dangerous, and probably even more dangerous than the red political measures in the past. As regards the euro, what to do with the euro system and what the Germany should do?
Is it a solution for Germany to leave the euro?
Whether it's good for Germany to be in euro? It's simply, the issue is such that the 17 countries in the Eurozone now definitely do not form what we, the economists, call the optimal currency area. I can very easily imagine to have an excellent currency area with 5 countries, 6 countries, 7 countries, definitely not with 17 countries. So the whole project of the introduction of the euro was a totally premature idea and premature implementation of an idea. So the issue is what to do now. The issue is to discuss what was wrong 12, 13 years ago is one thing. The question is what to do now. In my understanding, it's necessary to let freely some countries to leave the Eurozone. I am convinced of that, and in this respect I have some experience, because some of you may remember that we almost 20 years ago, in my country, in Czechoslovakia, we dismantled one monetary union called Czechoslovakia. I know that most of you speak about it as dismantling of Czechoslovakia politically, but Czechoslovakia was a sort of political union in the current terminology. Czechoslovakia was a fiscal union, and Czechoslovakia was a monetary union. And we decided to dismantle Czechoslovakia, and on the 1st of January 1993, we separated the two countries, which means we dismantled the Czechoslovak political union and we dismantled the Czechoslovak fiscal union. Nevertheless, we had a feeling that when we already have one currency, maybe it would be economically helpful to keep currency union, to keep a free trade area, which we did, and to keep the monetary union, to keep the old Czechoslovak crown. So we divided everything on the 1st of January 1993, including all the embassies in the world. When Czechs got the Czechoslovak embassy in London, the Slovaks got the Czechoslovak embassy in Paris, and so on and so on. We divided everything in the country, but we kept the monetary union. After 5 or 6 weeks, it became clear. I was Prime Minister at the time. It became clear that without a political union or without a fiscal union, there can't be a monetary union. So after 5 or 6 weeks, we decided to liquidate the Czechoslovak monetary union. And I always repeat that it is technically, organizationally, politically, a very simple task. So it's not true that the splitting of a currency creates terrible, dramatic problem, as all the Eurofans, Eurocrats are trying to tell us permanently all the time. For the Czech citizens, I always say that the splitting of the current currency was a non-event. The people forgot it already. They don't remember what happened. Simply nothing happened. In the next days and weeks, they could switch. They could change the old banknotes and coins for new banknotes and coins. No problem. No one lost one Czech crown. Of course, the next day after the separation of the currency, the Slovaks devalued their new Slovak crown by 10%, and during the year by another 10%, exactly what Greece would need to do now. It's that simple, and don't believe those who tell you that it's damaging, would create financial dramatical problems and so on. It must be done quickly, rapidly, and friendly, as a joint decision of the Eurozone and the individual country, not as an unfriendly decision of one side of that equation or another. I did it personally. I experienced it. This is not a theoretical description of the situation. We did it at home.
Take a question from Ivan Lawrence, please.
Mr. President,
as my friends in this audience will know, I agree with everything you've had to say. So can I ask you a question as a devil's advocate? You've not once, no reason why you should, mentioned China and India and the rise of the economic East. One of the arguments for the European Union and its monetary affiliates is that a united Europe will be better able to defend itself economically against China, India, any of the countries in Asia who rise to economic power. What chance have nation states on their own got, even if they are closer to democracy and closer to economic potency, living individually in a world facing a resurgent China, India, and South Pacific?
First, I Simply there are many topics, and the fact that I didn't mention China and India was just that the topic of my presentation was different. I definitely believe in the rapid economic growth of the so-called BRIC countries, including China and India, and I'm afraid that those countries will define the 21st century. I'm absolutely sure that Europe will be a declining, less and less relevant continent. But I don't agree with your fighting China or China fighting us. I don't see China is fighting your country, my country. That's definitely not true. Simply the issue is whether we are or are not competitive vis-à-vis Chinese firms. And no political integration, no European Parliament, no European Commission, no European Court of Justice would increase the European productivity and European competitiveness. So I really don't like the thinking in terms of continents fighting once again the other. What we see is a fight or competition of one British firm and one Czech firm with one Indian and one Chinese firm. And this is a fair competition. We will either be productive and competitive or not, but it has no connection with political unification of continents. So I don't like this way of looking at things.
Right, I'll take a couple more questions, and then we've got an opportunity to...
We will slowly
yes,
coming to the end, please.
Yes, absolutely. Two more questions. Lady in red in the middle row. This lady here, standing up now.
Lady in the middle.
Yeah.
Mr. Klaus, what do you think about the further enlargement of the European Union towards the countries of Southeast Europe, and I have Bosnia particularly in mind, and in the more distant future, Turkey? Thank you.
Well, first, speaking as a European politician who attends some EU summits, I must say that the idea of EU enlargement is forgotten. It's not an issue anymore. I know that there is a communique when on page 27 there are two sentences saying that we will continue EU enlargement, but practically this is not an issue discussed for the time being. I think that with Croatia there will be for some time no entry of any country into the EU, maybe Iceland, which is such a tiny country that it's easy to accept it. So I don't expect that the enlargement is an issue. But in grouping, in meetings like this one, I always say, there is no blackboard or anything similar to that. I always say that there is an inverse relationship between the number of participating countries in the European integration process. Imagine on a horizontal axis you have number of participating countries, and on the vertical axis you have the degree, the deepness of European integration. Can you imagine such a diagram? So with one country you can have an absolute integration. So you start here, and there is a curve of that type. So I really believe that with less countries, you can have deeper integration, and the more countries you have in the EU, there will be a tendency for less integration. And because I am very much in favor of less integration, the result is that I am very much in favor of expanding the number of EU countries. The more countries we will have, the less deep the European integration will be. The optimum will be, let's say, 100 countries as member countries, including half of Africa, half of Asia. That would be for me an excellent solution, because it would make the role of the commanding heights in Brussels and in Strasbourg, of course, smaller and smaller. So I truly believe that there is a law, sort of an inverse relationship between a number of participating countries and the degree of integration. And so for me, let's accept all the other friendly countries which want to be part of that. Tomorrow, Turkey, day after tomorrow. No, I will not say anything.
Thank you very much indeed. We now have the opportunity to have a reception with President Klaus in the lower ground floor. So you will have an opportunity to talk to him one-to-one. Can I just conclude by thanking the President for coming here today in a very busy schedule and giving us such an intellectually honest speech. In some 30 minutes, he dealt with all of the key issues that Europe faces today, and he put forward solutions to those issues. We're extremely grateful for that. We're also grateful that you were prepared to speak clearly about monetary union and the ability of countries to leave monetary union, and also that you gave such a clear message on the folly of attempting fiscal union. Your clarity today is welcome, but also you have demonstrated that with political will and real leadership, things can change. We here in the UK hope that leadership will come forward in a similar form to the leadership that you offer, that can bring change to this country and change to its relationship with the European Union. Thank you, President Klaus.